Good. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, so I'm going to give a fairly observational talk about the stages of evolution of massive galaxies, including massive Starburst-QSOs and then red galaxies. And I'm going to touch on a couple of different observational probes of how these things are linked, including both clustering and gas content from absorbers. And this is work done with both people from Deep 2, and then in the second part of the talk I'll be talking about some results that come from the BOSS survey. And my main co-conspirator on the clustering evolution and some of the outflow studies is Alison Coyle from UCSD, and then there are a bunch of other people from Deep 2 who are listed here, of course. So you're probably all familiar with this background, that there are various stages of the massive galaxy life cycle. Locally, very luminous starbursts are generally mergers. At redshift of 1, it's not clear that the same thresholds and star formation rate would apply. You can have something that's greater than 10 to the 11 solar luminosities in the infrared. That's a luminous infrared galaxy that looks more like a disk than a merger, and we've seen a number of examples of those, for example, in Reinhardt and Linda's talks. What we know about the highest star formation rate objects is somewhat less clear because those are rare. There's not as much information about them. Now, there are these scenarios. I've borrowed a picture from one of Phil's papers in the middle here of you have a merger, and then there's a nuclear starburst. You get a luminous or ultra-luminous infrared galaxy. Some process of blowout occurs, or obscuration removal occurs. You get an optically luminous quasar, and then through a process that I will perhaps ungraciously call hand-waving, this quenches star formation, and you're left with a red galaxy, an elliptical. So one of the things that we want to test is whether this is actually effective and how these phases are linked. So some of them are short-lived and some of them are long-lived. Both the ULIRG and the quasar are relatively short-lived phases, and of course red galaxies are presumably long-lived. And one of the problems is that you can't just sort of go off and simulate this very effectively, because the stage of feeding the quasar, you have to resolve extremely small scales, and we don't really know how to do that in a merger simulation. So that's why I'm looking at observational tests of this type of stuff. So this idea that there's blowout is often referred to as quasar mode feedback, and then there's another idea of radio mode feedback. You could also call these, I've labeled them here, ejective and preventive. So one is removing ISM from a galaxy, and then another is preventing subsequent accretion, because we've realized that you need to keep red galaxies red. You need to, if you don't do something, they'll just keep accreting gas. You'll get subsequent star formation, and we'll wind up with extremely massive things that aren't red, which is not what we observe. So they've been named QSO or quasar mode and radio mode, and I think that's Darren Croton's fault. He isn't here to defend himself. But one shouldn't, although these are sort of linked to, it's illustrative, these are sort of linked to quasars and to radio bubbles like we saw earlier, but you shouldn't necessarily take them literally. Just to get oriented, on the left-hand side I have some redshift of 1 luminous infrared galaxies, and on the right-hand side I have some redshift of 1 ultra-luminous infrared galaxies. And you can see these are I-band HST images, and you can see that their appearance is, some of them look like spirals, some of them look sort of messed up. Their appearance is probably heavily modified by dust. And what I want to do is find other observational tests rather than just attempting to morphologically classify them to say something about what they are. Just briefly, David Koo already talked about these wind results. These are wind results from Deep 2, where we looked at magnesium-2 outflows, and we found that the outflows are stronger in higher star formation rate, higher mass galaxies, and they're probably heavily mass loaded, although that's kind of a hard number to measure. I want to emphasize that these are energetically not strong enough to evacuate the ISM of a galaxy. This is not what you consider star formation that would end itself. I don't think anyone ever thought that was a good way of ending star formation in a galaxy. I just wanted to make sure that we pointed that out. Here's another result on winds, which is a little more germane to the question of quenching. So this is from a paper from last year that Alison Coyle and I led. And this was looking for similar outflow measurements from post-starburst galaxies and X-ray AGN selected from Deep 2 and from Sloan. And what we found was that there is evidence for winds in these objects, either in absorption or sometimes in fine structure emission lines. However, they're not incredibly high velocity, and they're not of the energetics that you would consider. You would say, oh, look, this is evidence for a leftover wind from an AGN that caused the starburst to stop and left us with a post-starburst galaxy. So this was not evidence for kind of strong ejective feedback. And interestingly, we were sort of inspired by these extremely high velocity outflow galaxies that were found by Christy Tremonti a number of years ago in SDSS. However, it turns out that those aren't good examples of AGN feedback either. There's this very nice paper by Alex Diamond-Stanek where they've used HST images to measure sizes and then WISE satellite near mid-infrared detections to show that, in fact, those things have extraordinarily compact, obscured star-forming regions, and they're typically not detected in the X-ray. So actually, they aren't AGN either, even though they have outflow velocities of over 1,000 kilometers a second. So on to the next test. I'm going to attempt to spend some time talking about clustering. And this is I think one of the sort of meat of what I want to say is looking at these short-lived phases, ULIRGs and QSOs, using clustering as a measure of where they reside and how they might be linked. So this is an audience of galaxy people and a lot of theorists, so I don't need to explain to you that clustering is important, probably. But one of the nice things about it is that we understand the physics behind it. And we know that clustering is linked to host dark halo mass. And obviously, clustering strength is linked to that mass. And so if we measure, we can tell approximately where a particular population, for example, a ULIRG or a quasar or whatever, resides. That's modulo some things like halo occupation and so on and so forth. The plot here is just a plot from one of Alison Coyle's papers about the correlation function of deep 2 galaxies. So there's two lines there for red and blue galaxies. The upper dashed line is red galaxies, and you see that red galaxies are more strongly clustered than blue galaxies. This is a known result. So this is at redshift of 1. At redshift of 0, this is also very well known. And we can quantify this and look at correlation lengths and so on and so forth. But we can also look at other populations and see whether they are clustered like red or blue galaxies. And so that's what I want to talk about. So for a rare sample, something like quasars, say, if you want to measure their clustering, you can do a survey like 2DF or Sloan and measure the clustering over the whole sky. Or for Deep 2, we don't have that option. It's a galaxy survey that covers few degree patches. What we can do is we can measure cross-correlation of the rare sample with the galaxy tracer population. My example for this, I hope this example is sensible, is if you had something rare like, say, museums, and you wanted to know where do museums occur, if you calculated their cross-correlation with people, you would find that museums tend to occur in dense environments. While trying to calculate the pair counts of museums across the entire United States would not be a particularly useful way of going about it. So these two plots are from a paper that Alison wrote in 2007 on measuring the cross-correlation of QSOs with Deep 2 galaxies. So there are only 52 QSOs in the Deep 2 fields, and measuring pair counts as a function of radius is not going to be very successful there because of all the shot noise. However, if you have thousands of galaxies, then you can do a much better job. So in the left plot is the projected correlation function. I don't know if this thing actually has a laser pointer. Oh yeah, here we go. So here we've got the projected correlation function, and the galaxies with themselves are the dashed line, and the quasars with the galaxies are the solid line, and you can see that they're basically identical. on the right-hand side is now this is in relative bias terms. So it's the bias relative to the galaxies. And here the quasars are the solid line again. The blue galaxies are the dashed line. Blue galaxies are clustered like all galaxies because they dominate the numbers. And the red galaxies are this dotted line here. And the quasars are clustered like the blue galaxies and not like the red galaxies. The red galaxies are the more massive population. This was a result that's true at 95%. It basically agrees with what we know about quasar clustering from the autocorrelation function. Quasars are in massive but not really, really massive halos. This is at redshift 1, of course. Interestingly, Allison's subsequent paper on X-ray AGN showed that they were clustered like the red galaxies. So the X-ray AGN, which are lower luminosity AGN and probably more longer lived than the quasars, are clustered like the more massive objects. So our goal was to also measure this for the ultraluminous infrared galaxies. And just to show you what this is done with, this is a cone diagram of one deep 2 field. You have to kind of read it. I couldn't make it. It would go all across the entire wall. So I had to kind of break it up. You read it left to right and down. And the little dots are galaxies coded by color. And then there's some other color codes for various kinds of infrared luminous galaxies and whatnot. And you can see that there's a lot of rich clustering structure in here. You can also see why it's hard to do this with photometric redshifts. This is a sort of a pretty good photometric redshift error bar. So the results on ULIRGs. I have 2 different deep 2 fields, and I'm showing you the results independently. And this is log radius on the x-axis and projected cross-correlation on the y-axis. And I hope you can see that there are a bunch of different colored lines on here. The magenta one is the ULIRGs, and the red one is the red galaxies. These are both correlated with the entire galaxy tracer population. And ULIRGs are pretty much clustered like red galaxies. So ULIRGs live in massive galaxies. That's perhaps not shocking. Whether or not they are mergers or something, they're things with a high gas content that you need a fair amount of mass to sustain a star formation rate that's 100 solar masses a year. Actually, in both fields, they kind of kick up in the smallest separation point, which is sort of interesting. But for now, let's just concentrate on the overall strength. If you go down in infrared luminosity, there's a really hard to see cyan line, which is roughly the same as all galaxies. That's the next half dex down in infrared luminosity. So there really is a difference between the objects that are above 10 to the 12 in infrared luminosity and the next half decade and the half decade below that are, because the fainter ones, the luminous infrared galaxies, are pretty much clustered like the blue star-forming galaxy population at redshift of 1, the sort of bright end of the blue cloud. So this ULIRG threshold, which is pretty arbitrary, happens to be a real physical distinction right here. It's essentially the things that are the very high end of the infrared luminosity function. So the ULIRGs are probably occurring in groups. They're clustered. They're in these red galaxies, or they're like the red galaxies. There are no rich clusters in the deep 2 volume, so they're not a cluster-only population, but they are probably in somewhat dense environments. There's this peak at small separation, which could be a sign of a 1 halo term in the correlation function for halo occupation distribution aficionados, if there is such a thing. So it's strong. There's strong clustering. It's not hugely strong. It's like the observed red galaxies in the same volume. The other interesting thing is that the luminous infrared galaxies are not going to evolve into the red galaxies on a short time scale because they have such a different clustering, which is another piece of evidence perhaps that luminous infrared galaxies at redshift of 1 have a substantial component of disky or star-forming galaxy population. They're not all major mergers. But I think that's kind of semi-accepted now, perhaps not totally accepted. Anyway, the real interesting thing, I think, is that I told you earlier that the quasars were clustered like the blue galaxies. The ULIRGs are like the reds. ULIRGs and quasars are both short lifetime phenomena. So you can't have one go into the other in a one-to-one way. Here I'm just showing this in terms of relative bias. So it's log radius on the x-axis, and unfortunately the y-axes are not the same scale, but they're both bias relative to deep 2, because one of them is log and the other one's linear, but sorry. So the left-hand plot is the one I made, and the right-hand plot is from Allison's paper from a few years ago. I showed this earlier in the talk. So the red galaxies here are this dotted line. The quasars are like the blue galaxies. Up here, the ULIRGs are quite biased, so the ULIRGs are actually above the red galaxy line, which is roughly the same as the log stellar mass greater than 11 line. So the other thing is, thanks. These are the same field, or same two fields, same field galaxy samples. You can't go from ULIRGs to quasars. You can go from ULIRGs to some kind of high mass subset of quasars, perhaps. The other problem is that you can't go from quasars directly to a redshift of 1 red galaxies. And my conclusion from this is that ejective feedback is not an effective quenching mechanism. You know, if you had all of the quasars blowing out their gas and stopping star formation, then they ought to turn into red galaxies, and they don't all do that. So this scenario is oversimplified, which is perhaps not insanely surprising. We tend to oversimplify things. It is true that the ULIRGs could turn into ellipticals. So now, in the last couple of minutes, I want to talk about a different probe of massive galaxies, which is absorption systems. And this was a project where we attempted to get a sample sort of, not exactly for free, but by piggybacking on BOSS, the Baryon Oscillation Survey. So this is an SDSS-3 survey, and it's possible in BOSS to put a small percentage of fibers on targets that aren't the BOSS primary targets. And we targeted galaxies that are near the lines of sight to SDSS-2 QSOs. And we can do this because it covers the entire area over again. In SDSS-2, you couldn't have usually a fiber on a QSO and a fiber on a galaxy at the same time, unless they happen to be in an area of plate overlaps, because the fibers physically collide. So here I have some galaxies that are projected near QSOs. The colored points are ones where the impact parameter is less than 100 kiloparsecs. So what we're doing is the QSO spectrum already exists. We find the redshift of the galaxy, and then we know where to look in the QSO spectrum for an associated magnesium-2 absorber. These are galaxies that are redshifts of 0.4 to 0.5 mostly. And this is color and magnitude, so the red ones are red and the blue ones are blue. And the circles are the ones where there is an absorber associated, and the X's are ones where there isn't. Here's some absorbers that are near red galaxies, so within 100 kiloparsecs. And because these are Sloan relatively low resolution spectra, they're pretty strong absorbers. That's all we can see. So some previous results from the literature. This is from work by Xiaowen Chen of magnesium-2 equivalent width versus impact parameter. And there are some red galaxies in here that are detected and some that are undetected at larger impact parameter. And Chen and also her postdoc Gautier did not find a significant difference in the covering factor between red and blue galaxies. On the other hand, Jessica work showed you this earlier. The COS Halo survey does find a substantial difference in the covering factor in oxygen 6 between blue and red galaxies. Oxygen 6 and magnesium 2 are different phases, so this is not at all contradictory. It may not even be surprising. It does require an explanation. This is the BOSS sample again. Over here is impact parameter and detection fraction of magnesium-2, again for fairly strong systems. And for blue and red galaxies, the blues have a somewhat higher detection fraction of magnesium-2 at small impact parameter, but the reds are 30%-ish in the 0 to 50 kiloparsec range. Now, these are all pretty massive galaxies. So this is way inside the virial radius, which is out of here somewhere. And there's a somewhat lower fraction once you go out in radius. But again, these are pretty strong magnesium-2 systems. There could be some weaker ones hiding in there. So we confirm that magnesium-2 is present near massive galaxies, both blue and red, which is unlike oxygen-6. There is cool gas around redshift of 0.4 to 0.5 red galaxies. It's well inside our VIR. And we need to think about, what happens what happens to this gas? I haven't ruled out the idea that this is associated with a satellite or something like that, but at some level I don't think it matters. It's inside our rear. You have to figure out what's going to happen to it eventually, and maybe you have to deter its accretion in order to keep the galaxy red. So I'll go to the summary. From the cross-correlation study, we found that redshift 1 ULIRGs are strongly clustered like red galaxies, but the redshift of 1 QSOs are not. So there's both a ULIRG QSO difference and a QSO red galaxy difference, which I think is not good news for quasar mode feedback. I do think that maybe it's boring old gas exhaustion that turns off galaxies, because you drive all that stuff into the center, you're going to use it up by star formation. The problem is, how to keep gas from getting onto the galaxy and continuing to form stars. And I think the magnesium-2 systems point to the same problem. It is possible to get gas into the halos of red galaxies, but then what happens to it? That's all.